So, hello everyone. In this part of our series, we are going to speak on classical economics. So, classical economics has the following assumptions, which are merely Say's law of supply creates its own demand. Second assumption is that there is a perfect competition in the market. Third assumption is of classical dichotomy. Right? Classical dichotomy, I'll explain it in detail. Let me just list down. Fourth assumption here that we take that labor market determines the equilibrium, right? So, and the most important assumption of all assumptions here is wage price flexibility. So, let me begin with wage price flexibility only. We see that as soon as we change the price, the wages change immediately, all right? But demand function formed and what are the things that affect it? Since we say that labor market determines equilibrium, so labor demand को पहली बात affect करता है आपका prices. So now we see that this curve is a downward sloping curve and this curve is actually nothing but VMPL. VMPL stands for value marginal product of labor, PX into MPL. Prices may change will affect the labor demand. If the prices increase, the labor demand will go forward. If the prices decrease, it will go backwards, right? Anything which affects the MPL is going to... So, second thing that we have here is, second factor that affects the labor demand, technology. Technology affects the MPL. The third thing is infusion of capital. Right, infusion of capital. So both of them have a direct relation, and if technology is increased, it will shift forward. If capital is infused, it will shift forward. Now let's get to the labor supply curve. So our labor supply curve is something like a upward sloping thing. So things that affect the labor supply curve are primarily prices. Secondly, immigration or shift of labor supply. Okay, so shift of labor supply, either emigration from other countries or rural से urban में immigration. Okay, immigration में होता है कि आते हैं, immigration में अंदर आना और emigration में बाहर जाना. So अगर emigration हुआ है, कर्व जो है वो backward shift करेगा, सप्लाई कम हो जाएगी. अगर इमिग्रेशन है तो कर्व फॉरवर्ड शिफ्ट करेगा, ठीक है. एंड तीसरा फैक्टर जो यहाँ पे एक इम्पॉर्टेंट है, फैक्टर्स लाइक वुमेन एंटरिंग द वर्कफोर्स. इन दोनों का जो इंटरेक्शन होता है, थिंग विच लीड्स अस टू बिलीव दैट ओके दिस इज द वेज रेट गोना बी एंड दिस इज व्हाट इज द since classical model is a supply side model, the input market is the one which determines the equilibrium. Okay, because this was our one assumption. Okay, now our other assumption was wage price flexibility के कारण क्या होता है कि जो हमारा average supply curve है वो एक vertical रहता है. So I'll get back here.
कर्व हियर. तो ये इसकी assumptions है. यहाँ लेबर सप्लाई ऐसा वेज सेट हो रहा है, ऐसे यहाँ पे लेबर सेट हो रहा है. अब यहाँ पे एवरेज सप्लाई और एवरेज डिमांड कैसे सेट हो रही है. सो एवरेज जो डिमांड है जो हमारी, दैट इज नथिंग बट अ फंक्शन ऑफ योर फिशर्स मनी सप्लाई थ्योरी, which was given as ms into vy, that is velocity of money, equivalent to price into output. Okay, तो इसको हम अगर वापस से रीडायरेक्ट और अपने हिसाब से अगर हम वो अरेंज करेंगे, रीअरेंज करेंगे, सो वी विल गेट समथिंग लाइक ms into vy upon y. ठीक है, which will eventually give us a curve like this. Have I written demand? Yeah. तो अभी if somebody says कि when the money supply is increased, I mean what will be the monetary impact? So we can simply see कि ठीक है, monetary variable हमारा ये ms यहाँ पे है, which is here. So if money supply is increased, price will increase, so the curve will go ahead. Something of this manner. ठीक है. Now let's see what is the condition with our average supply curve. Average demand curve ये हो गया. Average supply curve जो है हमारा, that is a vertical straight line. In case of this model, alright. Why do we see a vertical straight line? Primarily attributed to the wage price flexibility assumption that we have. Okay. Now let's read more about this here. देखो क्या होता है कि ये आपका मार्केट वो हो गया वेज से डिटरमाइन हो रहा है. तो इफ़ वी सी अ supply demand sort of a equation, because we say that this supply creates its own demand. तो supply कैसे हमारी सेट हो रही है, that is our labor supply and labor demand का interaction. ठीक है. So let's say कि we increase on the labor demand by increasing of the px or maybe any other factor. So हमारा LDD converts to LDD dash, and that stems out with the fact that दिस इज गोना बी इमीडिएट चेंज हो जाएगा. प्राइस में इंक्रीज हो तो इमीडिएट चेंज हो जाएगा. सो प्राइस इंक्रीज हुआ तो वेज भी इंक्रीज होगी. ठीक है. तो वेज इंक्रीज होगी तो दैट फॉर दैट LSS हैज़ टू शिफ्ट बैक. ऑलराइट. दैट लीड्स की, ठीक है, जितना इक्विलेंट उसमें वेज का चेंज हुआ है उतना ही इक्विलेंट उसमें उसका चेंज हो जाएगा. प्राइस का चेंज हुआ है उतना इक्विलेंट वेज का चेंज हो जाएगा. सो हियर वी कैन सी दैट दिस थिंग इज हियर. वी सी अ पैरेलल शिफ्ट हियर, एंड दैट leads us to ki y being constant, and it's just that the price increases. The wage increases to W2 and W1. Now if we plot it on our price and output in a thing, so the price increased, that is the reason that my LDD changed. Now for that px and output, so that led ki kya hua ki the demand curve became something like this. All right. And this happens to be P1 and 2P. So that is the reason that due to wage price flexibility and it had the change in price has a proportionate impact on the wages, and that is why we see that this sort of thing is happening. So we have to conclude with the thing that this is the supply demand interaction in a classical model. Alright, this is the PX and this is the output. Now, having said all of this, let's just analyze what is the monetary impact going to be. Okay, if we introduce any monetary policy change in the economy, how is it going to affect us? So let's say that the money supply is increased. ठीक है. Let's say that the money supply is increased. That will lead us to something sort of this place where our initial AD was this. Now AD is equals to, we know that the AD is actually affected as in like P is equals to MSY upon VY upon Y. So now if our MS is increased, so our AD will go forward. But since in a classical model we just have a vertical supply curve, that will lead us to the monetary policy being purely inflationary in nature.
That is only the price will change, and there will be no change in the output. So monetary policy is inflationary. All right. Now let's see about the fiscal policy. Okay. So the fiscal policy is seen by another theory here, which is the loanable fund theory. ठीक है. Loanable fund theory says that if the real interest rate is high, there will be a more supply of fund. Okay, तो loanable fund theory यही suppose करती है कि how are we getting the funds? Primarily through people depositing in the bank. So if we have a higher interest rate, so we will have more supply of funds in our market. Okay, fund. So देखो इसकी जो डिमांड कर्व है, ये जो सप्लाई कर्व है, इट्स अ डायरेक्ट रिलेशन, राइट, एज यू हैव टोल्ड कि अगर ज़्यादा इंटरेस्ट रेट रहेगा तो पीपल विल नॉट वांट टू होल्ड इट मोर इन देयर हैंड्स एंड दे विल डिपॉजिट इट. लोनेबल फंड डिमांड इज इनवर्स कि इफ द इंटरेस्ट रेट इज मोर पीपल विल नॉट डिमांड मोर, एंड इफ इट इज़ लेस, क्योंकि रीपेमेंट में दे विल हैव टू पे लेस मनी हियर इफ दे स्टैंड बाय this sort of situation rather than in a situation like this. Alright, डिमांड जो होती है अलग अलग चीज़ें होती हैं इसके, जैसे इन्वेस्टमेंट के लिए, गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर्स के लिए. सो ऑल ऑफ दीज थिंग्स आर देयर. तो नाउ व्हाई इज द LDD डाउनवर्ड स्लोपिंग? बिकॉज वी आर अज्यूमिंग दैट वी हैव अ डिमिनिशिंग रिटर्न्स टू कैपिटल. Okay, that is the VMPK is downward sloping. ठीक है, is downward sloping, and that is the reason that this thing is downward sloping, the demand curve for the fund, and दैट इज अगेन ड्यू टू द इंक्रीज्ड कॉस्ट ऑफ बोरोइंग्स, राइट. तो अगर हमारा इफ़ यू आर सेइंग कि ठीक है हमने कुछ फिस्कल पॉलिसी चेंज यहाँ पे किया है, तो फिस्कल पॉलिसी चेंज किया है, दैट विल एक्चुअली लीड अस कि हमारा डिमांड, जो लो लेवल फंड की डिमांड है वो बढ़ जाएगी. तो ये कुछ ऐसा फॉरवर्ड शिफ्ट हो जाएगा. शिट, शुड बी पैरेलल. ओके, नाउ दिस थिंग हैपन्स, तो इक्विलिब्रियम यहाँ से यहाँ चला गया. ठीक है, इससे क्या हुआ, आपका इंटरेस्ट रेट और बढ़ गया और इससे आपका लोनेबल फंड भी और बढ़ गया. ठीक है, सो इससे आपका कुछ आउटपुट रिलेशन वगैरह पे कुछ फ़र्क भी नहीं पड़ा. 10 ये सिर्फ यहीं पर रिवॉल्व करता था कि ठीक है इनको फंड मिल गया, दैट ऑल ऑफ दिस हैपेंड. 10 फिस्कल पॉलिसी is completely ineffective. Alright, it is completely ineffective. So these are the things around the classical model. I'll meet you in the next session where I will speak about the pure Keynesian model.